Joining me now to discuss what we have seen, Mark Thiessen, former chief presidential speechwriter for President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor, and Mercedes Schlapp, who is a former spokesperson for President George W. Bush. Welcome to you both. So we wanted two Republicans to react because he's got to vie for that Republican nomination before he could do anything beyond that. And you have two different issues when it comes to some of the things we discussed, different points of views. Mark, let me start with you and ask, how did he do?
I thought he did very well. I mean, the interview was fascinating, and it shows some of the strengths he has as a candidate, but also some of the challenges he faces. So you brought up, for example, with Common Core, you said to him, how are you going to get right with the GOP base on this? Given his record on education in Florida, he shouldn't have to be getting right with the Republican base on education. He has one of the best records on education of any governor in the history of this country. He's the father of school choice, first statewide voucher program in the history of the country, tripled the number of charter schools, African-American Hispanic achievement skyrocketed. So why is he on the defensive on education? He spent most of that interview defending his positions on education instead of extolling his record.
I asked him to. I mean, are you saying he should have dodged and gone to his happy place?
No, I'm saying that it's because of Common Core. Because Common Core is seen as code for federalization of the education system. And the irony is, but
Mark,
what
he's
people
made
see
it very clear that, but he's made it very clear that he believes that the federal government should not be involved. But again, it presents a very interesting situation where can he make the case to sort of that suburban GOP mom voter that it's beyond Common Core, that it really is, as Mark was saying, about his record as governor in terms of being an education reformer. But it's still not necessarily coming through. At least it didn't come through in this interview. But again, if you could tell throughout the whole interview, he did string along this whole idea that education is an incredibly key part of his campaign and something that I think he's going to be focused on.
Well, but he defended Common Core. I mean, he does have a case to make in his education reforms and the situation in Florida. But what I thought was interesting about the Common Core section was he did not back down. He said, look, we need higher standards. He does not favor nationalization of it, and I know that's an accusation. But he wanted to make clear that he thinks there's a case to be made for Common Core. He's going to stand there and make it.
And his biggest challenge will be, can he persuade the voters that this is the way to go? And the thing is, Common Core has morphed, right? Because it was passed by bipartisan in the National Governor Association. Then when it really became into reality, as we know, then there was a lot of pushback from conservatives. I
said to him, people are irritated by it. And honestly, if you go through, I looked at all these questions, these math questions, they're ridiculous. They're ridiculous. If I wasn't such a nice person, I would have shown him some of those questions and asked for answers, because my team and I were pulling our hair out. But this is going to be an issue. But this issue and immigration, Mark, too, he is standing firm. One thing you can't say about him is he's not pandering to anybody.
No, that's exactly right, and I think he handled immigration exactly right. First of all, NBC News poll, Wall Street Journal poll the other day, 8% of Republican primary voters consider immigration their top issue, and another poll found that 64% of Republicans agree with him on immigration. So it's not like he's out of the mainstream. So at least some of that 8% probably are on his side. And second of all, what he's doing is he's making it an issue of character. Saying, I'm a president who stands by my beliefs, I don't bend in the wind. And it's in contrast to Hillary Clinton, who is changing her position on everything from marriage to immigration to the rest.
Very true.
It sets up a good contrast.
It's not just Hillary, though. A lot of Republicans have switched positions, too. But let me ask you this, because he said, Mercy, he said, running is tough. Running for president is tough, but serving as president is tougher. And, you know, speaking to sort of the moral compass you have to have in the firm. But let's not skip right over how tough running for president is. They don't just switch and flip for the fun of it. They do it to win. They do it because they believe they won't get the nomination unless they say what their base, they think, wants to hear.
Right, but I think for Jeb Bush, I mean, he's just so comfortable in his own skin, and he's not about to just bend over and take any sort of position. And that was one of the things that President George W. Bush did very effectively. He was very strong on his immigration reform stance, for example, and never really caved in on that. He stood on principle, and I think Jeb Bush is taking that very similar approach. He's saying, look, there's going to be things we don't...
Let's talk about that, too, because I predict tomorrow that there's going to be a lot of talk about what he said about President Bush's foreign policy. Moving on from Iraq, because I do think, in fairness to Governor Bush, when I said, knowing what we know now, would you have invaded Iraq, I think he was trying to answer the question of, do you believe it was a mistake at the time? That was my take on it in the interview. He wasn't trying to say, still today, I don't think there was an issue. I think he was, if you listen to the full answer, he was saying, look, given the intelligence and so on. But then he went on to say, you know, that nation building is a good sentiment and that exporting our values is a good sentiment. And Mark, you know, you're part of that whole neocon thing. That's been highly criticized by a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm proud of it too, just like he's proud of his brother.
So,
I mean, look,
don't you think, is that an area that he's going to take a hit on? Not
you know
from
what,
but from others?
You know what? There's only one candidate in this race who disagrees on those things, and that's Rand Paul. I mean, the fact is the Republican Party basically embraces the Bush doctrine of fighting the terrorists over there so we don't have to face them over here. They support drones. They support Guantanamo. They support the Bush counterterrorism doctrine. And so, you know, I mean, and quite frankly, the entire country does. There's a poll, 64% of Americans think that we should send ground forces to Iraq to fight ISIS. So this is not like the country is against a hawkish and a president who's for American leadership. So I don't think that hurts him.
Go ahead, Mercy. I mean,
or the country
you don't
broadly.
think there's not like a wing, because there's a more libertarian wing of the party, and I recognize what's happened in the past couple of years. They've become a little less isolationist and more, well, we better do something. But that language, no problems?
Well, I got to tell you, you look at South Carolina, for example, where you had the GOP candidates going over there, and what did they talk about? It was about that strength, you know, peace through strength. And I have to tell you, in this interview, what really came out in this interview was the Jab doctrine, which was security and peace. And I think as we start seeing what happens with the Islamic State, and we start seeing growing threats in the homeland, that will take a huge priority, I think, in this presidential election.
And that was another line he said, that he said leading from to object to leading from behind does not make you a warmonger, which was an interesting way to put it. I want to ask you before I let you go about manner. He slimmed down, had the nice suit, had the haircut going. I felt that he was more at ease in that interview, sort of more presidential in his presentation than I have seen him in any other thus far. Am I wrong, Mark?
No, I think he looked very at ease. I think he looked very presidential. The Bushes all look presidential.
But Jeb, I don't think that Jeb has really hit the governor has really hit his stride on that front prior to that moment, with all due respect to him.
Well, he's been out of the game for a while, so he's been on the campaign trail now for a while and talking to people, so he's getting that back.
Go ahead, Mercy.
Right, I think it's about that fire in the belly, and I think he realizes he can't take it for granted. He's got to win these primary voters, and he's going to do it in a way where he's going to push forward a strong agenda and really not cave in to just however the wind is blowing in terms of policy, and just stick true to himself.
I don't know if it's fire in the belly. So it's probably hunger in the belly, given they slimmed down so much. I will tell you, I give him props for this. You couldn't quite hear what he said, but there was one line in which I laughed out loud because I talked about how Barbara had said we haven't had enough Bushes, we have enough families, and he said I have enough self-awareness to say that's a little odd. Which I laughed at, but you couldn't quite hear his word. It was odd. In any event, thank you both for your